Welcome to this special presentation of the Sanfa Collector Society Lecture Series. Thank you for tuning in to our program with John Benaud, retired County Extension Agent and Horticulturalist for Tom Green County. And now here's John with his talk, San Angelo, a look at the past, present, and future.
Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you today about past, present, and future landscaping in West Texas. And if you think about it, West Texas and landscaping sometimes doesn't go together, but because we've lived here for so long, we have made it that way. And we have some really fine examples of beautiful landscapes, and we think we will in the future as long as we have water and the climate continues to be in our favor. So if we think about the past, when the early settlers arrived here, it was rolling plains because we had grassland as far as you could see, belly high on a horse. Then the settlers came, and the plants that they had, those few they had, were medicinal plants that they used to keep the children healthy, and passed down plants that might have been their grandmother's roses or irises, or plants that were easily taken by travel and replanted in a new location. And that was it. There weren't any nurseries here. And besides that, we were busy feeding ourselves and trying to stay alive. And it wasn't until about in the 40s that landscaping became pretty big across the United States. And you think about turf grass as a good way to enter the landscaping industry or talk about it. And there were sheep grazing the White House lawn. That was the way they mowed it because manpower was in short supply during Woodrow Wilson's era, and the mowers they had didn't have motors. And if you even do a little short history on lawnmowers, it went to steam mowers, which were only owned by the large estates and places like universities and the White House. And the common man, like you and me, we had that old push one. So we didn't have a lot of turf grass. And it wasn't until the invention of the gas engine that was mounted on a lawnmower that we had sea-to-sea grass in our landscapes. And so things have really evolved in landscaping. And we probably have some in the audience out there who are fairly young and don't realize all this history. So we're only going to use a brief time on this history. We're going to talk about what it is now and what it's going to be like in the future. But the big change in landscaping in West Texas came right after World War II, when VA homes were being constructed in large numbers. And so everybody could afford a home with the assistance of either a veteran's loan or earning their money, and they managed to do this. And a lot of the population were in brand new housing, and they didn't want dirt blowing around, and they didn't want hot sun baking them. So they went first to trees, and then of course they went to grass, and then they started going to shrubs. And in that era of the early 50s, there were very few nurseries, and the available supply of plants was very limited to just a few. It hadn't really gotten on to the point where we like new and unusual plants. It was plants that would survive. In the case of trees, it was fruitless mulberries, Arizona ash, box elder maples, which you find hard to find in a nursery today because we have so much better choices. But that was a very, very big part of the beginning of West Texas landscaping. And then boom, what happened? The drought of the 50s. My goodness, a lot of those plants that people did plant died because of lack of water. They just had other things that they were busy doing rather than taking care of landscapes. And so it was a very hard time in the 50s around West Texas when there wasn't water for landscapes. We still see survivors, but we also see old remnants like dead live oak trees that are still fossils from the drought of the 50s. And then what happened, we had a resurgence after the rain, and a good example was right in San Angelo, where the San Angelo Standard-Times sponsored the sale and distribution of pecan trees. And if I throw the number 40,000 trees out to you, would that just blow your mind? But they have pictures in the archives of the Standard-Times where the dock, where they usually are loading papers, was full of pecan trees. And all you have to do is go through the Santa Rita area of San Angelo and see that there's a pecan tree between the street and the sidewalk, and they're everywhere in everybody's yard. They planted them too close. They did a lot of things that we know now might have been a little bit better way to do it. Also, we might have chosen a better tree than pecans, because pecans are actually lovers of water. Now, that being said, it made San Angelo called by many one of the largest pecan orchards in the world, because there were pecans everywhere. So it was a great way to jumpstart landscaping after a very hard time. So we got into the next thing after that was pesticides, and we had use of pesticides indiscriminately in landscapes because they were real new to landscapers. We didn't want weeds in the yard, we didn't want bugs eating the plants, and we now had a whole host of products to choose from. We even had ads on TV, which could be black and white at that time or color, that said that if you sprayed your yard once every 2 weeks, you would have no pests bothering your landscape. And we bought into it, and we used a lot of it. We contaminated some rivers and streams and got some issues. Then in 1962, Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring. And if you haven't read it, it's still very appropriate. And it got us all to thinking, were we doing the right thing? And so what we've learned through landscaping, as well as life in general, is that we do the best we can with the knowledge base we have at that time, and if we realize we're not doing something right, we change it. So as we entered into the integrated pest management period of landscaping in the late 60s and early 70s, we discarded the pesticide use. We identified the host plant, identified the pest, determined if it was a problem, then chose a mechanical, cultural, or biological method to control it. If not available, then we went to an alternative, least harmful product that we could spray, pour on, whatever, that would help to control the pest. And that is, you don't hear the term much today, but that's the way we have adapted our landscapes now. We choose plants that are well adapted, that don't have pests, first of all, and if they do, if they're not causing a problem, we don't deal with it. If they're causing a problem, then we deal with it the best way we can. And that's one thing that really advanced landscaping. And then came the adapted species. You know, we only had a handful of shrubs to use. You could still find those around some of the old homesteads. We had a handful of fruit trees, pears and apples. Many of those still exist. We just had a limited supply. And then globalization kind of occurred. We had horticulturists going all over the world collecting species, bringing them back, and then you'd be seeing them first in arboretums, botanical gardens, things like that, and then they would filter down through nurseries to us. And to this very day, it's hard for you and I to go to a garden center without seeing something we've never seen before and want to try it. But we still don't know if it's adapted. But we have ways now on the internet and through public supply of knowledge like the Extension Service, here at the museum, whatever, that can help you get some of those decisions made. But adapted plants were the key. And to give you an example, native plants, of course, should be adapted. When we say using Texas natives, that's very, very important. But not all Texas natives are adapted to West Texas. This is a Texas mountain laurel. It is adapted to West Texas. All types of soils, a stellar performer, and we have used it quite well. We have other plants that are non-native. This one is from Japan. It's a Japanese plum or loquat. Beautiful specimen plant, very well adapted to our heat, to our cold, to our lack of water. And so we're seeing plants from all over the world that are adapted. And then we see plants that are being offered to us like a pine tree. There are no native pine trees to this area of Texas. A little further south and west, Rock Springs, there's a native pine tree called the pinon that does well, but these suffer after so many years here in West Texas. So they may be adapted and grow at first, but they may not have longevity. So you need to do all of that research, okay? One of the things we've learned about landscaping, or what the current trends of landscaping are, is first of all, water usage. We went through a period in the 80s and 90s and in the early 2000s of plenty of water, not enough water, wet years, dry years, and plants, even that some of those that were established, suffered from this inconsistent available water supply. So water usage has become probably the #1 criteria for selecting plants. We would love to design a landscape now in West Texas that if someone told us we could no longer water because it was only available for personal use, that our landscapes would survive. And believe it or not, that can happen. We have plants that will live years without water that don't necessarily look like cacti, succulents, or desert plants. We're available to choose those. Another thing that has changed our current landscaping is family needs. With the age of electronics and so forth, the use of landscaping for kids to play all day long outside in our yards has changed a lot. Our family needs might be more of, say, an outdoor entertainment area like an outdoor kitchen. They have changed from what they were in the 50s or the 60s, and that dictates change in your landscape. If you have an older home that has an out-of-date landscape, if it looks nice, that's fine. If it doesn't meet your family needs, then it's not really what you want in most cases, and that's a reason why we change them. Another thing is environmental influences. We're up to scale today on realizing that it gets really hot in West Texas, and energy efficiency is important. So having plants that shade the home in the summertime and allow sunlight to penetrate in the wintertime to warm the home up so that you don't have exorbitant heating costs can all be accomplished with a good landscape plan. And so trees are number one as far as controlling how energy efficient our homes are. And the next thing is practical turf areas. You know, we had fence line to fence line turf grass at one time when plants weren't available, and we enjoyed mowing because we had a lot of time every Saturday morning to mow, but our needs have changed and our focus. I don't want to spend all day maintaining my landscape anymore like my father or grandfather did, and so I'm going to have a practical turf area. So it's the area that the dog might need to use for pets, whatever, for children to play in. That front area is always attractive, and we're going to use that as a practical turf area. Now realize that turf gets a bum rap from water usage people. They say it's the largest waster of water in the landscape, and that's not true. People are the largest wasters of water in the landscape. We can grow turfgrass species in this area of West Texas that will survive with watering once a month, even during the heat of summer, once it is established. Now, it may not look like much. So what we have now learned under current trends are that we may not have a golf course like look on our turfgrass during extreme periods, but we'll keep it alive and it'll do its job of keeping the dust down, keeping things cool, and so forth. Efficient irrigation is very important, and that is up to you and I to know when to water, how much to water. And a great example was the winter of 2019 to 2020. In most of West Texas, rainfall occurred in amounts adequate and frequency adequate that you didn't need to irrigate landscapes at all from November all the way into March, which saves an awful lot of water. So you'll learn this over time, and there's a lot of help on the web for that also. Different soils require different amount of water. Those of you that are in deep sands, you're going to have to water more frequently because water moves out and air moves in. Those of you in clay soils will have a great reservoir of water. When water from rain or irrigation goes into that clay, it fills the pore space up, runs the air out, and will stay there as a bank of water for weeks that roots can absorb. In rocky soils, it can be really, really tough. And that's something that you look at your neighbor's landscapes, you look at what's growing around you, and you find plants that have succeeded in that environment and you try to use them. The switch from turf grass to rock yards, we had a real rampant switch about 2 or 3 years ago, and there's some downsides to that. Excessive heat is number one. And if you've never heard about the heat island effect, you can get online and see, and here we have a picture of it. It shows that when you're out in the country, you have air temperatures above the landscape that are moderate, and as you approach areas of pavement, hardscaping, gravel yards, the temperature rises. And that's because the hardscape absorbs that heat, retains it over the evening, and it gets worse the next day. And so you have this heat island effect where the environment around this urban setting is exceptionally warm compared to its surroundings. One way to combat that is turf grass, occasional trees in parking lots and over hardscapes, these gravel yards that have trees that have see-through foliage that lightly shade the hard rock, things like that will help to cool it down. There are a lot of examples of beautiful landscapes out there. You can drive in South Texas, West Texas, and you can take these ideas and use them yourself. And here's the thing. There's a part of art, and I'm glad we're at the museum today, that is involved in landscaping that so many of us don't feel comfortable with or fail at or just avoid it altogether because we don't know. But there are the basics such as plant materials selection that match your soil, good water usage, and all of this, but it's how to put them together in a landscape that really makes it attractive. And so you may want some help. There are landscape architects. These guys have an architectural degree basically with a little bit of horticulture, and there's a lot of engineering, and so they are at the upper level. Landscape designers would be like me. I know a lot about plants and how they need to go, and there are many people out there at your local nurseries that can do this, that will work with you, a do-it-yourself project to help you place plants, choose the right plants, and put them in the numbers and in the spacing that they need. There's a little bit to it, but don't be scared from it. So that's very, very easily said, but if you'll drive around and get ideas from other people, it's a whole lot easier done. That being said, right now, and I'll read this to you, this is from the National Association of Landscape Professionals. These first-time home buyers are millennials, and they don't care about a fancy eat-in kitchen. Instead, they're obsessed with lawns and gardens. And it's fun to see that generation go back to where our grandparents were, where they loved gardening, they raised their food, they loved roses, and so it's so fun to see the next generation want to buy a house, for instance, that is not only maybe move-in ready, it's not going to be a major project, but that has a landscape that is functional. In other words, it's going to be great for their kids, energy efficient, conserves water, and it also looks very, very good. So that being said, if you're one of the people out there that's thinking about selling your home, or you're living in a home for a short time, you'll want to go through the landscape project just like you might want to update a kitchen, because it's one of the #1 reasons that people who buy homes will buy your home is because of an attractive landscape. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this, and we didn't bore you to death with some of the history, but landscape is changing every day, and it's wonderful in West Texas that we have the ability to choose plants that make it look so beautiful.
Thank you for tuning in. Join us via Facebook between 5:30 and 6 for a live question and answer session with John. If you don't use Facebook, a recording of the session will be posted on our website on Friday. You can email us your questions for John at museum@samfa.org, that's samfa.org. Anytime between now and then, you can post your questions on our Facebook page, or you can call us with your questions at 325-653-3333, and we will ask John those questions between 5:30 and 6. Looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Bye-bye.